Hey guys, I know a lot of you watch my channel because you've got the itch and you're looking to make your next knife purchase, which I totally get because I'm also a knife guy. So I invite you to open the description of the video you're watching right now and click here on my Amazon store where I've compiled some of my very favorites. As you can see, my most recommended knives and my favorite budget knives are right at the top, but there's also categories like knife maintenance, pocket clips, knife storage and display, and then a whole bunch of knives by popular brands. There's something down here for everybody, so make sure you take a look. Thanks. What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got another interesting knife review slash knife overview to do with you guys. This is the Strider Knives 0.75 or 3/4 AR. I had only recently discovered this style of Strider knife, and I think what I had been looking at on Instagram was actually older variants of the full-size AR, both in custom form and in production form from a long time ago. Now, I don't know how long Strider Knives has actually done a 0.75 AR, but as you could guess, it's basically 3/4 the size of a full-size AR, which is incredible because this is definitely still a full-size knife. Absolutely. Lots of interesting things to say about this knife. First off, this knife was lent to me by @AmateurKnives on Instagram. Give this man a follow. It's because of people like him that I'm able to bring you guys daily knife content. Speaking of that, it does get expensive to run this channel, uploading once, sometimes twice a day. So if you'd like to support me, there is a link in the description for my Patreon where you can get your hands on some cool stickers and at the same time gain access to my once-a-week Patreon exclusive content. The support would absolutely mean the world to me. So let's go ahead and get this out of the way. The reason that it looks like a Medford, and the reason that if you guys watched my unboxing of this, I believe I said something like, this feels very Medford-y. And anybody who's owned a Medford knife knows exactly what I'm talking about. Not only is the titanium thick, you know, the jimping is a little bit aggressive, but just the tightness, the tension on the lock bar, you know, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Medford knives always smooth up over time and they gain that sort of luxurious smoothness, but they maintain what I consider to be a sense of robustness, tough. It feels, you know, that's why people are, oh, Medford, because they feel like that. They continue to feel like that over time. I'll tell you guys right now, I am a big fan of Medford knives, and I'm a big fan of Strider knives. This knife was basically a product of a collaboration between Strider Knives and Medford Knives. Now, this was a little bit of a problem here recently, and I found out via some information from a friend that Strider Knives did not immediately disclose this. For what reason? I have no idea. He sent me a screenshot of the official, you know, statement from Josh Lee from Strider Knives. This was in the official Strider Knives group. He says, yes, we collaborated and worked with Medford Knives on the 3/4 AR. Yes, we are also working on a 3/4 GB. I don't know what that is. In addition, a few other things yet to be announced. So don't worry, your knife is 100% USA made. I don't know if people were actually concerned with whether or not this was USA made. It is. This is a design from Strider, one that has existed and been produced by Strider in the past, and this particular one was made by Medford Knives. It's an issue because they did not immediately disclose it. Whether or not you know, consider, I can completely understand why people are bothered by that. The fact that it actually is made by Medford Knives, look, I've handled a lot of Medfords, and now recently, thanks to Amateur Knives and a few other people, I've handled a lot of Strider Knives. They're incredibly well made. In fact, I'm kind of shocked that a collaboration like this has not occurred in the past. So my actual standpoint on it, not that my opinion matters, is yeah, you probably should have disclosed it, but if you got one of these, if you picked it up and paid the money for it, it's made really well, right? So we're gonna move on. Anyways, let's go ahead and get a measurement on this guy. If I can find my tape measure, there it is. So despite this being a 3/4 version of the full-size version, it still comes in at 8 inches overall. Blade length comes in at about 3 1/4, and so does the cutting edge. You can see here because of where the titanium ends and that belly begins. So you're actually still getting 3 1/4, a full 3 1/4 inches of cutting edge, and then there is a choil there. So that's nice. You can really choke up right behind the blade. Let's go ahead and do some size comparisons here up against the Ontario Rat Model 1. Rat 1 is coming in at 8.6 inches overall. So you can see here, it's not so much length that's the determining factor in whether or not I consider this a large knife, right? 8 inches is, a lot of people call that medium. I call it full size. That's kind of what I say. So yeah, this is definitely a big knife. Not quite as long as the Ontario Rat. How about up against the Spyderco PM2? PM2 is coming in at 8.3 inches overall. Let's do some other comparisons of knives in the same caliber. The Hinder XM18 is coming in at 8.25 inches overall, a little tiny bit longer. How about up against an actual Strider SNG? I'm sure a lot of people will be curious to see how this looks. I think this is a wonderful size comparison because you can see here the main differences between not only the blade, but like the handle profile, the primary and forward choil positions, lanyard hole positions, right? You can see there, I mean, this is obviously a Strider design. It just differs from the SNG. For anybody who's, curious, the .75 AR, despite being a 1/4 inch shorter, is 100% a more robust design. It is a bigger, thicker, more meaty knife. Does that make it better? No, not necessarily. I'm just saying, for those of you who prefer the bigger, meatier version, there you go. Both of them are equally unavailable. We'll get to that. How about up against the Spyderco Para 3 for a final size comparison? Para 3 coming in at 7.25 inches. So how's the action on this guy? Well, it's very Medford-y. Medford knives sort of feel the same in the pivot as like a Chris Reeve knife. There is a thumb hole here, and after a while, eventually you're going to be able to do something like this without wrist. But as of right now, it doesn't really want to come all the way out. It will. I've owned Medford knives in the past. My 187 actually got so smooth that it could fire. I mean, anybody who's handled the 187 from Medford, it's like a 4.25 inch blade, and it's 187 thousandths stock thickness with a flat that carries like 80%. It's a heavy blade. That thing got so smooth, it had recoil to it when I would flick it out with the middle finger on the reverse flick, and I had no wrist on it. It was just crazy. They all do that. This one will do it too. I want to leave some of the enjoyment of break-in to at amateur knives because he's had barely any time to play with this. But yeah, it is getting smoother and smoother by the day. A Medford knife feels that way from the beginning. Everything is very, very tight so that, Greg has actually said this in a video before. It's so that when the knife breaks in, it doesn't get wobbly. It breaks in tight, but at the same time smooth, and it feels good, but you still maintain that tightness that is necessary. If you're going to go out and use the knife, you don't want the blade wiggling all over the place. You don't want play in the pivot that affects play in the lock bar, right? Which is the part that's actually keeping the blade in place. So that makes sense to me. It feels like a Medford knife. I think people put a lot of, I'm one who loves a drop shot action on bearings, right? Use the XM18 on bearings as an example. Oh yeah, that's nice. But am I gaining any sort of utilitarian benefit from it? No, I'm not. Because the truth is I can still disengage this knife and open it up with one hand, no problem. So the action's good. How about carry profile? This guy's thick. It's a thick knife. You can see there, if we're lining those scales up right there. Yeah, it's pretty thick, both in blade and in terms of height even, actually. It's just as tall all the way down as the PM2 and Para 3. So this is going to take up a lot of room in your pocket. It's like I always say, if you are working in an office, if you're wearing dress pants, if you're wearing athletic shorts, skinny jeans, whatever, yeah, it's not going to be comfortable. It's also not going to be comfortable if you carry anything else in your pocket besides your knife. I wear jeans, and I don't carry other stuff in my pocket besides my knife. So it'll bother me less, but I'll admit I would have to adapt to this. Like all things, you will adapt to them if you really, really want them to be a part of your life. So here's how much weight you're adding to your life. 7.05 ounces. Honestly, it's right about what I expected. That's about half an ounce over what I normally like to carry. And I'll admit, this is a big, girthy knife. Coming in and out of the pocket, surprisingly easy. It's surprisingly, sorry, trying to get my jean lint out from underneath that pocket clip. Surprisingly easy to get this thing in and out of the pocket, and that's because of the clip and the position of the clip versus the old position on the Strider. You can see there, this one's a little more down here, making room for the lanyard hole. This one, the pocket clip goes right into the part of the screw that's holding in the standoff back here. The positioning in general is just better. It's not necessarily a deep carry clip, but I also wouldn't call it a shallow carry clip. In fact, considering it's such a robust knife, it's kind of impressive. It carries very similarly in position of the clip to the Strider PT, which is the little guy, and is for a million reasons easier to carry than this guy. But if you really, really want to carry a big, thick, heavy knife, and you like the idea of a Medford and Strider collaboration that is essentially a more wieldy Praetorian, like, I mean, think Praetorian Genesis, which is the medium-sized one, but actually a little easier to carry, right? This isn't necessarily a bad choice. For everybody else in the world who's just used to regular pocket knives, it's going to be way too big and way too heavy. Yep, absolutely. Did we get everything there? You guys probably want to know what the stock thickness is, so we'll use the new calipers sent by Andrew Toole. Fantastic person. I can control everything. That's nice. 0.19. Wonderful accuracy. Oh, it's so nice to have accuracy on my calipers finally. Thank you so much, Andrew. Let's talk about materials and anatomy here. So what we're looking at is titanium. Tumbled thick titanium, probably at least 145 thousandths, probably more like 165 thousandths. In fact, we can just sort of take a look at the XM18 here and blades. Yeah, it looks like the titanium is just as thick as the blade on an XM18. So I'm going to say 190, 165, 165. That's a lot of unmilled titanium, no milling on the inside, anything like that. This is 6L4V titanium and then CPM S35VN. A lot of people, you know, they're like, if I've seen the price on that, why isn't it 20 CV? This knife is definitely 100% made to be used. It is not a novelty. It's not a toy. It's not, you know, it's kind of right in between that hyper aggressive overbuilt mark that you see from Medford and the, you know, very purpose-built nature of a Strider. Now, that's not to say that Medford knives are not purpose-built too, but it's just kind of striking that in between, right? Medford knives tend to be, you guys have seen my review of my Praetorian T, my Praetorian Tie. There's a recent review of a Medford Marauder, right? So if you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and take a look at those. Those things are absolutely freaking huge compared to this guy. This guy's a little bit more wieldy, but it still has that nature about it. The knife uses nice, large phosphor bronze washers. So, I mean, that's versus bearings, you know, because a lot of people think that if any knife that's expensive should automatically have bearings, which is not the case. This knife can get, you know, in the dirt and debris, and the blade's going to resist, you know, corrosion. And at the same time, it's going to be tough because it's S35VN. It's going to be easy to sharpen. And it's going to be heat treated correctly. Neither Strider nor Medford is known for not doing their heat treats properly. They absolutely know how to grind a blade. They know how to heat treat a blade. It's going to be, you know, created in a way that is very, very functional. Let's talk about ergonomics. This kind of looked odd to me until I got it in hand. And it's one of those knives where there's some sharpness. There's some angles. This is a little sharp up here. This is a little angular right here. The pocket clip kind of wants to dig into my hand, but the lines absolutely lock you in. I'm going to let you guys know, fidget factor on this guy is not something that you're going to get. This is a tool. It is clearly something that is, number one, designed to be used, and number two, designed to be used with gloves. This is something that they built going, we do not care about people sitting around on their couches flipping these things. We want people, you know, the people who are going to buy these, we're making these knives for people who are going to take these out and who are going to use them. Whether they're soldiers, whether they're working on a job site, you know, or just in their backyard, but it's meant to be something that you throw gloves on to use. Jimping that's that deep and sharp is meant to catch the material, the hide on a glove or the leather on a glove, right? Or the nylon or whatever gloves you're wearing. It's meant to catch that, right? This area in here, you absolutely can choke all the way up. The full meat of my finger can get in there without any worry that it's going to ride up on the blade, and I like that, right? Back here, you can hold it back here and do some, I guess if you wanted to, I'm not going to speak on behalf of Greg Medford or Mick Strider and say that this absolutely is or is not covered under their warranty, but if you wanted to, you can lock in back here and use the weight of the blade to do some light impact cutting or chopping. Preferably, I would suggest if you're going to do that, I would imagine, you know, something like getting through thick cardboard, right, or a small piece of wood or something like that. You can do that. You've got options. Even upside down in the reverse grip. In fact, this is probably the most comfortable position right here. You can get both fingers, you can get two of the smaller fingers into this area right here. Up here, you can kind of force it, right? but it's most comfortable kind of like this. It is not the most comfortable knife in the world, but I can understand why the lines are like that. I'll tell you this, none of it is as big of a deal as the lock bar disengagement right here. Everything on this knife, every line I can understand, even the sharpness of the jimping. This isn't necessarily sharp right here, but it's angular. I can understand it, right? There was a purpose behind it. This area right here where you disengage the lock bar, oh my goodness, it is way too sharp. It doesn't matter if you're wearing gloves or not. That is just unnecessarily sharp, right? I do not have delicate hands, right? I'm not saying I have the toughest, I've got the toughest hands in the world, but you can see here, I don't have delicate hands, right? It's just overly aggressively sharp. Another area that is aggressively sharp for no reason on this knife is this area in here. This, you can see there, it's easily shaving off my fingernail. That could have just been knocked down, right? They did it up here. This area of the blade, look, that's knocked down. Just knock that down in there. Medford knives are all like that. My Praetorian was like that. My 187 was like that. Any of the Medford knives that have holes, they're like that, right? Now, I imagine they do that for the same reason they make the jimping sharp, so that it'll catch a finger that's, you know, gloved, right? But even a little bit of, like, knocking it down just a little bit. I'm not saying I know more than, you know, Strider or Medford, but I look at that and I'm like, even if it was knocked down a little bit, I probably would still be able to get my finger in there if I was wearing a glove, right? So, that's just my thought. Moving on to the blade, I like that it just says Strider. And then on the other side, it has the Strider logo and S35VN in plain text. It's very straightforward. Just, again, sort of pushing the idea, hey, this is a tool. It's not meant to be flashy. It's meant to cut. But at the same time, it's got the premium look and the premium feel. That's just a product of adding some of the finishes that make it look more tool-esque, right? Sort of all mashed together. The flat on this thing is very prominent. It carries out to about 70%, 75% the length of the blade. It looks really nice. The combination of the grind lines and the tumbling here, this is the part that really made me think Medford. This is a hollow ground blade, and despite it being as thick as it is, it gets... So my buddy Spirited Whiskey has this exact same knife, and he was like, I am beyond impressed with this thing's slicing capability. It gets so thin behind the edge. Right, and I was looking at it and I was like, you know, I'm sure it cuts, but like, could it really be that? This gets really thin down here. That's crazy. Look at this. I mean, okay, really thin for a big knife, right? I'm not saying that this is an open L, so don't get me wrong. I'm saying it gets shockingly thin. Right here, this hollow grind is deep. It's crazy. So, yeah, you know, it's not going to be drag proof. Like if you're pushing it through thick cardboard, you're going to have a little bit of drag because the blade is so thick. But is that blade going to be able to bite into whatever material you're trying to cut? You bet it will. Absolutely. S35VN, nice, tough, not only edge retentive, but edge stable blade steel, so that's good. You have a nice swedge up top, very aggressive swedge, giving you a surprisingly functional puncture tip. It looks delicate, but it's not. You can see there how much material is left and right of the top or the spine of the blade. I still wouldn't go stabbing it into door jambs and trying to pry them open. Don't try to pry open a safe or a bomb shelter door with this knife. But yeah, you've definitely got a robust tip there, not a problem. One of my favorite things about Strider knives is the way that they do their external stops. They are small and out of the way and unmistakably stops and not deployment mechanisms. But they do the job. They mitigate pressure away from the pivot, which in this case is Strider's typical see-through pivot that is, I believe, 1/4 inch and plenty robust in and of itself, so no issues there. Like I said, there's a very generous forward choil. That's nice for locking in. Let's go ahead and do a hardboard check. I always forget to do that. Get out my handy-dandy WIA bit selector and WIA magnetic driver, two items that are extremely, extremely recommendable. And you can actually pick them up in that Amazon store that I referenced at the very beginning of the video. Just open up the link. It should be right at the top of the description. It'll open up a whole bunch of different categories. You'll see my storefront, same thing that you see the banner on the YouTube page. And then scroll down until you see knife maintenance. You'll be able to find this guy and this guy pretty easily. But take a look around. There's a lot of stuff down there. And there's something down there for everybody. So I'm going to guess... Where is it? There we go. I'm going to guess the handle screws are T10. I don't know that for sure, but we're gonna take a look. Yeah, T10. That's fantastic. So this is a Strider pivot, and that means that the one side is hex, but it is free spinning, and to get it to not do that, you need a spanner tool. Now that's a pretty oddly specific spanner tool, but they do exist. You should be able to pick them up at a hardware store for between $1.50 and $2.50. I don't know what their standpoint is on getting into their knives and taking them apart, but if you really wanted to, you are not locked out of this knife. Anytime somebody calls a spanner head a proprietary pivot, it makes me cringe because it's not. It's not a proprietary pivot. That's just how they look. It's the same kind of thing on a Hinderer knife. There's definitely a way around it, so it's not that big of a deal. On the handle scales, we have this sort of aged, I think they actually call it an aged bronze or antique bronze finish, and that's exactly what it looks like. It looks like Medford's tumbling, and I think it looks nice. You know, it's not going to hide every single scratch, but it's going to hide it a little bit. I think the contrast between this and the blade looks really good. I would have preferred the pivot wasn't black. I would have preferred the pivot was satin like everything else. Same with the lock bar stabilizer, but it's fine. Look at the size of this closed position stop pin. It's not the open position stop pin because those are the stops up here. But the, oh my gosh, the size of that thing is crazy. I don't know why it's so big. It's neat. It's not in the way. You know, it's just big. We've got some typical, just regular Strider standoffs back here, style that you normally see. I love the oversized hardware. I love the satin finish on the standoffs. You know, it just adds to that robust feeling. I'm a huge fan of the position of this pocket clip and the look of the pocket clip. It's very simple. That bill, like I said, creates a little bit of a hot spot out here, but it's not crazy. You know, I mean, if you're not gonna wear gloves and you're gonna cut with this thing for 15, 20 minutes at a time, yeah, it might start to bother your hand, right? But if you're wearing gloves, which is honestly what was probably intended, that's just my, I mean, when I say that, I'm guessing, considering it's Greg Medford and Mick Strider, just looking at their past designs and picking this up and holding it for 2 seconds, I'm like, yeah, this was meant to be used with gloves, right? It's a work knife. It's a tool, right? So if you're wearing gloves, it's probably not going to bother you. If you're not wearing gloves and you plan on cutting with this thing, you know, for 15, 20 minutes at a time, it's going to bother you. It does have a Rick Hinder style steel lock, over travel stop and lock bar stabilizer. That's pretty typical of Strider knives. You see that all over the place. It's not something that he necessarily stole from Rick Hinder. I think they've talked about this before. That's something that I don't know if there was like a patent on it and it's up, or if he struck a deal with Rick Hinder, but to my knowledge, Rick Hinder and Mick Strider are pretty friendly. So that's been a thing for a long time. There is no steel lock bar insert on this guy, and like I've said many times before, it does not need it. The lock geometry is absolutely fine. This knife locks up exactly the same way that every Medford knife I have ever handled locks up. It is so unbelievably solid. You would think it's all one piece of material. That's honestly how strong these things lock up. It feels like the whole thing is a big chunk of steel, right? And that it's unyielding. But no, it's the lock bar interaction with the tang, even though it looks super early, and it is 100% reliable. It's not going anywhere. So that's fine. There is no lock stick, and despite it being, you know, there's a lot of tension. It takes quite a bit of force. You can do it with one hand, right? The knife comes down and is perfectly centered and has, in my opinion, the appropriate amount of detent. So that's nice. The biggest problem with this guy is the sharpness right there on the lock bar. I honestly could handle everything else. I could handle everything else. And even wearing gloves, I'll admit, if I was wearing gloves, I probably wouldn't notice it as much. But there are going to be times where people are going to use this knife, right? They're going to, you know, have gloves, they're going to use the knife, they're going to set the knife down on a saw table or a bench or something, they're going to finish what they're doing, take their gloves off, and pick this knife up, right? And then they're going to go to disengage it, and every time you're going to go, ah, look at this. See what I mean? That's from the lock bar. And again, my thumb is covered in dead skin, right? My entire hands are not calloused. You know, I'm sure there are people watching, you know, my whole hands are calloused, it wouldn't bother me. All right, fine. For the rest of us, though, the other 99% that this is applicable to, yeah, it's kind of sharp. I'm not sure why that's the case, right? It's just a really sharp angle right in there. Take a look at how Strider normally does this. Come on now. What's the problem? This camera just does not like to focus on this SNG. I don't know why. But there you go. See what I mean? It's knocked down, chamfered just a little bit, and there's a little more of a bowl cut right there. This is wonderfully easy to disengage. This guy's just a sharp angle, just an unapologetic stair step. Not that big of a deal. So what's the price on these guys? They come in at a very Medford-y, Strider-y price of Strider-y. Why did I say that? Strider-y price. Medford-y and Strider-y price of $600. These are absolutely what I would classify as mid-tech. These are not 100% production. They're not 100% handmade, but these are not production knives. The blades appear to be exactly like other Medford blades, which are 100% hand ground. They are undeniably hand tuned. The hardware is hand fitted. The scales are probably machines, but then they're tumbled, and I would imagine there's some extra knocking down of corners and going through things, and they check every. Think what you want about Greg Medford, but they do hand check every single one of those knives, 100%. I have never received a brand new Medford and not been completely satisfied with its construction. That is the case. The fact that they are also made in the United States, that's 100%. And again, the materials used, there's no milling, there's no bearings, it's not 20 CV, there's no carbon fiber inlay. That is not 100% indicative of what you're paying for, right? You're paying for time, labor, and all of those little intricacies that go into making sure that the thing is going to function. If you buy this knife and you plan to use it, is it going to work for you? Yeah, I think it'll work for you, and it'll probably last you your whole life, and then you'll probably be able to hand it down to your kids. I'm not joking, these are made super well. Like, these really feel like something you could huck in a toolbox and get it out when you wanted to. Just like, everybody's got that old rusty pry bar, that old hammer in their garage, and you kind of, every now and then you take some steel wool to it and you knock the stuff off of there and you just keep using it. I mean, this is absolutely something that it's expensive, but it could be a tool on your wall or in your truck, your toolbox, or your tool bag in your garage or wherever you want. I mean, it's absolutely something that has a better place, in your pocket as a very dependable and, pretty resilient cutting tool. But at that price and at the weight, the dimensions, they're not going to be for everybody. It's going to be for a very specific amount of people that are either really into Medfords, really into Striders, or both, right? The controversy with it's not really a controversy. It's just they should have disclosed it from the beginning. I don't know why they didn't. It's kind of like, hey, come on, just tell us where they're made. It wouldn't have been that big of a deal. They did. That's going to turn some people away. Whatever. It wouldn't turn me away. Honestly, had I bought this, I would have been like, why? What? Why didn't you tell us that? Okay, well, can you just tell us next time? That's kind of, that's not cool. But I wouldn't have been like, no, take it back, That's not, I wouldn't have been like that. But that's what happened. So here's the thing that's going to keep most people from buying it. It's unavailable. And I know a lot of you who sat 27 minutes and 50 seconds and it's like, what the heck? You could have told us it's unavailable right now. I imagine that they will do another run of these. I imagine they'll do them in different, anodizing and maybe even some texturing. That'd be super cool. I think these are pretty popular, and they're always going to be small batch. You can, the best way to get your hands on them is to follow Strider Knives on Instagram and make sure you join their collectors group. I think it's on Facebook, and check their website, the Mixed Strider website, to see when things drop. That's your best chance to get it. But this is going to be going on my favorite knives of all time playlist, because despite the issue with the lock bar, it's still super cool and I love it. I absolutely do. But again, I'm a huge fan of Medford knives, and I am a new fan of Strider knives, having finally handled some. But yeah, I can't recommend it to everybody. Anyways, guys, I think that's going to be pretty much it. This was a long one. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on this middle complex logo right here and subscribe, because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody.